What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another video. Captain Cody Davis hanging out with you guys once again. Sitting here in the garage in the little tackle room, thankfully, because it is blowing, I don't know, 20 to 25 sustained out of the east outside right now. Seems to be the running theme down here in South Florida. Here over the last 4 or 5 months, it seems like this wind has not let up but a day or two, here and there. It's just constantly blowing. It's nuts. And since November, the wind has not laid down. So thankfully I didn't have to be out on Okeechobee today. Had an off day, stayed home with the little guy. He's homesick from daycare also. I just put him down for a nap, and while he's napping, I figured I'd come out here and spool up some new line on some of these reels for some upcoming trips I have coming up this week. But before I did that, I wanted to talk to you guys, or shoot a video for you guys, regarding a question that I just get asked about once a week, it seems like, and regarding what we're dealing with right now is, how do you adapt, or how do you adjust, or how do you approach fishing Lake Okeechobee on these super windy days? Maybe you have a tournament and it's going to be blowing 20 mile an hour, or maybe you just have an off day where you can go fishing and the only day you have, it's going to be blowing. What changes do you make? How would you approach fishing that day opposed to how you would if it was only blowing 5 to 8 miles an hour? So I'm going to give you guys kind of how I approach it and just some simple little tips to help you guys maybe catch a few more fish. Keep in mind, I don't know everything. I'm far from the best angler that fishes this lake. This is just my take on it. And also keep in mind that I hate fishing in the wind. It's been like that since I was 10 years old. I just don't like the wind. So I've made a couple adjustments to try and more or less use the wind to my advantage. Does it always work? No, but I've caught a lot of big fish and done very well in some events just thinking like this, okay? And using these techniques and presentations to help me not only get more bites, but more or less what I'm going to be talking about also, which I'll get into, is just your catch ratio goes way up fishing this way when it comes to fishing in these conditions. So first and foremost, a very simple way to think about fishing Lake Okeechobee is, especially if you're new to it, whichever way the wind's blowing from, go and fish that area of the lake. For example, if you have a dead north wind, don't go try to sit down in Pelican Bay. Now, if you have a 5 to 8 mile an hour north wind, you're okay. But when it's blowing 25, sustained with gusts to 30, don't go try and sit on the south end of the lake. Or don't go to somewhere like Pelican Bay where it's just wide open and it's just got a clear 35 mile an hour or 35 mile clear shot to build up and blow right in there. The water's going to be muddy. There's going to be 2 to 3 foot white caps and rollers in the grass. You're not going to be productive. You're not going to be efficient. You're not going to have a good time. Same thing goes the other way. Let's just say you have a 30 or 25 mile an hour south wind. Don't go try to sit at Nubbin Slough or Grassy Island or even something like, fish the side of the lake that the wind's coming from. You're going to be protected. And the other thing is, now the wind may have blown, let's just say we're going fishing today and it's blowing out of the south at 25 mile an hour. The previous 4 days, the wind may have blown out of the north hard, which means the south end of the lake will be dirty, but there's going to be clean, fishable water someplace, somewhere. Being on the south end of the lake now with the south wind, you can navigate easier. You can really depict kind of what water is good, what water is bad. You can troll around, you can fish efficiently without getting beat up, and you can find some fishable areas. Whereas if you're on the north end, it's going to be blowing in there, and you're not even going to be able to navigate correctly because you're going to get the crap beat out of you. You're going to beat up your equipment. So for the most part, just go fish the end of the lake where the wind's coming from. Now today we have an east wind, right? We get a lot of these, and for most of you guys know the east side of the lake, from say Nubbin Slough or so, or down to Pelican Bay, there's not much over there to fish. J&S used to be a hot spot, not much over there to fish anymore, especially this time of year. So besides an east wind, I'm saying, an east wind, primarily we fish the north, the south, and the west side of the lake. So on an east wind, it's kind of just, you got to try and get lucky and find some stuff out of the wind. But either way, that's just a kind of a quick little tip for that. Now, one thing that I do, it kind of helps me, is when you're fishing in heavy winds, I try my absolute best to keep a winding style bait in my hand the entire day, for a couple of reasons. One, well, we'll just talk about kind of what I'm talking about. Talk about what I'm talking about. Something like a vibrating jig. I don't have one laying in here. They're all on my boat. So like a chatterbait, a spinnerbait, or a swim jig. Something that you throw out and stay in contact with and bring back to the boat. Something like a lipless is great because there's never any slack in your line. There's never any play in your line. Whereas if you're working a worm or you're popping a frog or something, a lot of times you'll get a big bow in your line due to the wind, and that's going to account for, you might get the bites, but there's a lot of play in your line. You're not going to get a clean hook set a lot of times, and you're going to get frustrated. You might miss some fish, and it's going to spin you out. Whereas if I'm throwing this swim jig through thick Kissimmee grass or whatever it might be, I'm tight to that bait the entire time. You feel the initial bite. You can kind of reel through the bite. Make sure your slack is out of your line, and you're going to just fish a lot cleaner at the end of the day. On top of that, a winding bait for me excels in the wind. As much as I love to throw a swim jig, very rarely do I throw it on those calm conditions. I like it when it is windy, blowing, moving stuff around. That's when a bait like this excels. Same thing with a vibrating jig or a chatterbait. The way we're fishing the lake right now, in these big open areas, the way I approach it most of the time, if we don't have wind, I'm throwing something like, a burner worm or something like that, a swimming style worm, even maybe a Senko style bait, or maybe a topwater. But once that wind starts blowing, I tell my guys to put all that down. We pick up a vibrating jig. Again, it's something you're throwing and winding in. And not only is it more efficient, but they just bite that style of bait better, in my opinion, in the wind. I really don't throw a chatterbait at all if it's not blowing. Kind of the same thing goes for, a swim jig. And then for most of you that are from out of the state that come down here to fish, same thing goes for a spinnerbait. Can you catch a bass on a spinnerbait when it's not windy? Of course. There are little scenarios where you can, but this bait truly excels when you have some chop on the water and some wind. So keep that in mind. I see a lot of people that maybe want to learn the flipping technique, so they go try to pitch reeds when it's blowing 25 mile an hour and they're pitching in 2-foot rollers. Don't do that. As much as I love to flip, on a day like today, I probably would not even have a flipping rod in the boat. I don't know if it's that the fish don't like it. I don't know if they don't like that grass brushing up against them, but then again, they're in the Kissimmee grass. I don't know. I can't figure it out. I just don't get bit very well pitching reeds or anything like that in swells or rough water. The only kind of flipping I do when it's blowing 25 to 30 like this is, a lot of times what this means, it's not really the case today, but a lot of our big winds come following cold fronts that are moving in. And if you can find protected lines of pennywort, chopped grass, essentially junk mats or mats in general that are protected from that wind, maybe it's on the backside of a cattail island or something like that, those fish will get up in there, A, because they're not getting moved around and beat up, and B, a lot of times they know there's a cold weather system coming in, and those big females, especially this time of year, will tuck up under those mats to kind of stage, and then once we get into that warming trend, they'll kind of pull out and go and do the deal. But even if you're dealing with super windy conditions in August, if you can find some protected water with some mats, a punch rig, flipping 1.5 ounces or whatever through whatever you might find, as long as it's protected, it's not moving around with the wind, it's kind of stationary, that's what you want to look for in those backwater areas. Another little tip I can give you guys too is on these really crappy weather days, sometimes you have to play small ball, and what I mean by that is sometimes these typically unproductive areas in the lake will really show out in these conditions. My reason behind thinking that it happens, or that's not what I meant to say. My logic behind it is, a lot of these areas I'm talking about, maybe these backwater ponds, maybe these little dead-end canals or what have you, are for the most part stagnant. When we're not having wind, the water's just kind of sitting there. Maybe there's not a lot of bait in that area or whatever it might be. Sometimes the water's too clean. in these backwater areas because they're not affected by the wind, what have you. The water's crystal clear. You can see the bottom, and you guys go back in there and you're like, man, this looks good. I don't see any fish, and I'm not getting any bites. A lot of times, everyone preaches the gospel of looking for clean water on this lake. Clean water is not always your friend. In fact, if I find water that's crystal clear, I stay far away from it. Unless we're fishing on a day like we have today where it's blowing like this. For whatever reason, you can go back down these little ditch canals, these backwater ponds. When it's blowing, you got a ripple on the water. Sometimes some of these backwater areas, it might take a 20 to 25 mile an hour wind to affect it. And what I mean by that is it might be surrounded by tall reeds or cattails or an island or what have you. And a 10 mile an hour wind just doesn't do anything. It doesn't move the water around or anything. But a 25 mile an hour wind is going to put that ripple on the water. Oftentimes, you got cloudy conditions, but you got water movement. A lot of times you might have current blowing in there into those areas from the force of the wind and the pull of the water blowing into these backwater areas, pushing bait in there, which doesn't normally happen. So any of the fish that are in those areas kind of get keyed up and they set up to be catchable, more or less. And with that chop on the water and things, they're not getting as good of a look at your bait. Perfect example is 2 years ago with me and Kelly, essentially fished the Torrey Island campground for 2 days in that Roland Martin Marine Series Classic and got second place. The way I found those fish is I went out for a practice day. It was blowing. Actually, I had a Shiner trip booked. I got there early. My client wasn't going to be there till 9. I went out at 7. It was blowing. I didn't feel like going and getting beat up, so I went and basically fished around the campground and, whatever it was, a 5, a 6, a 4, and was getting a lot of bites. And now, granted, the conditions were not awful in the tournament, but we still fished in there, and if it weren't for that bad weather day, A, I would have never went in there, and B, I probably wouldn't have had as many bites as I did. And that led me to see what was really living in there and what we were around. So don't be afraid to go fish. Don't be afraid to get way in the back. Don't be afraid to go explore on these bad weather days. I'm not saying you're going to go to one of these areas in the back in the clean water and catch 30 pounds and 100 fish. A lot of times these little backwater ponds and little estuaries or what have you, there's dozens or thousands of them on the lake. Might not have a large number, a big group of fish in them, but on these nasty days, those fish that are holding in there are going to bite more often or more they're going to bite better than they would on a Chamber of Commerce day. So keep that in mind. But other than that, that's really about it. Just cover water. That wind's we don't have current on this lake. All of our current is driven by wind. So when you get that wind blowing, you're going to get water pulling or pushing into areas. Things are stirred up. The bait's getting moved around and pushed around. So those fish are usually up and moving as well, and they're wanting to bite something moving. They're kind of wanting to chase, as opposed to when it gets slick, calm, and nice, and you're pitching reed clumps that aren't, obviously aren't being affected by wind or anything, or you're throwing that frog or that spook. Most of the time, not to say you can't catch fish on like a topwater in those conditions, if you find a backwater area that doesn't have 1 foot whitecaps in it, you can. But for the most part, when you're trying to fish more towards the main lake where these bigger groups of fish are, if the water's clean enough to fish it. And throw something moving like a spinnerbait or a chatterbait. Oftentimes, in these more productive areas, the water is not going to be clean in these conditions. It's going to be turned up. But if you could see 3 to 4 inches down, that's plenty fishable. On top of that, throwing something with some flash, like a spinnerbait or a vibrating jig that has a lot of that vibration, helps those fish find that bait a lot easier. And like I said, I'm going to repeat myself, but you're in contact with the bait the whole way through the cast. You're going to feel that bite a lot better, and you're not going to have any sway or play in your line. You're going to be tight to that fish, and you're going to land, 90% of them. So that's how I approach it. I'm kind of an idiot, so you don't have to take everything I say seriously, but that's just how I approach fishing this lake on a very windy day, whether I'm guiding or whether I'm just out fun fishing or if I'm fishing in a tournament. But sometimes these nasty days are the days where most people stay home. There's less pressure on the lake, and these are some of the best times to get out and catch a really big fish. So don't be afraid of the wind. Obviously be safe. Don't do anything stupid, but don't, just because the flag's blowing straight doesn't mean you probably should stay home. And you might want to get out on the lake and just go fishing. You can't catch them if you're on the couch. So hope that helps you guys out. I'm going to go pull some line on some reels, and I'll be out on Okeechobee really the rest of the week. I've got a few open days remaining in February. If you guys want to get out on the lake, let me know. Give me a call sooner than later. I'm not trying to sales pitch you guys, but I think between February and March, I've got like 8 days open, maybe 10, something like that. I think it's going to be a really good spring. You know, February's been a great month. The past 2 years, February's been a great month also. So give me a call. We got the Toyota series this weekend. My buddy Matt W Fishing on YouTube. You guys should definitely subscribe to his channel. Definitely subscribe now, because he just took home a huge win. I think he won like 15 grand in the 2-day American Bass Association 2-day tournament. He just won that. He had 27 pounds the first day and 17 the second day. He's going to be staying here. He's fishing the Toyota, and my buddy Nick Hoining, who I don't remember if Matt fished the Toyota with us last year. I don't think so. Nick stayed here last year. He's obviously he's a hammer out here on Lake Okeechobee. He had, I think he got 7th in the tournament. He caught 27 pounds the second day, caught a big bag. They're both going to be staying here. They get here tomorrow. We'll probably do a podcast, drink some beers, and we'll probably see some content coming from them. And then following after that, there is the Bass Open. I'm not competing in either one of the tournaments. I just didn't feel like fishing the Open. I didn't feel like putting the money up. And same thing with the Toyota this year. Got another baby on the way. Got things coming. We're doing a lot here around the house. So didn't want to take off work, and I didn't feel like ponying up $2,000. So not going to be fishing that, but they will. So we'll be shooting some content with them, I'm sure, while they're here at the house. But other than that, trying to keep these videos pumping out to you guys. And like I said, I'm going to go spool some line up, stay out of the wind. And I'll catch you guys on the next one. Appreciate you guys watching. Like and subscribe. And go catch a fish.